After my life began again, Thomas started making excuses to delay our engagement. It became a pattern, a quiet avoidance that spoke louder than any argument. Then came the day Clara and I both fell into the river. Without a moment's hesitation, he swam to her and pulled her from the rushing water. I was saved by a different man, a quiet fellow from the village who happened to be passing by. He was known for being a bit slow, but his actions were quick and certain. To show my gratitude for his saving my life, a debt I felt deeply, I announced I would marry him. The news sent ripples of shock through the entire community. You have to understand, in my previous life, things had gone differently. Thomas had saved me, and we had followed through with our marriage as planned. Clara, however, had been pulled from the water by a local troublemaker, a man with a cruel streak. He attached himself to her, and not long after they were forced to marry, she ended her own life in that same river. From that day forward, the Thomas I knew vanished, replaced by a man who was cold and unreachable. After the economic policies shifted, he became successful in business, but he used his newfound influence to frame my father for a crime he didn't commit. My family lost everything. When I finally found the courage to confront him, his eyes were full of a chilling disdain. "What, are you pretending to be the victim now?" he had sneered. "If you hadn't insisted on that engagement, would Clara have died so young? She suffered so much. What gives you the right to have such a good life?" This time I decided to step aside. I would let them be together, offering them my silent blessing. But as the traditional red veil was placed over my head on my wedding day, I was certain I heard him whisper, his voice rough with emotion. "I regret it." My choice to marry the simple man who rescued me from the river was the talk of the village. "Have you heard? Amelia, the girl from the city, is marrying that simple man, Leo. Did she hit her head on a rock when she fell in?" The whispers followed me everywhere. "I'll bet he saw something he shouldn't have. She has to marry him now to protect her reputation." My best friend, Sarah, was beside herself with anger. I, however, remained calm. The outcome was the same for me, one way or another. Who I married didn't feel important anymore. A simple life seemed appealing. A simple man wouldn't be capable of intricate plots. He wouldn't bring ruin upon my family. Sarah gently touched my forehead. "Are you sick? Do you have a fever? Did the river water get into your brain? You could marry practically anyone else, but you're choosing him." She was furious on my behalf. That wretched Thomas. He left his own fiancée to save Clara. Even if you have too much pride to go back to him, there are so many other good men here. William's father works for the county, and Joe is about to receive a university scholarship. Either of them is a better choice than Leo. Sarah was well aware of my engagement to Thomas. She had been there that day, the one screaming for him to save me as I struggled in the current. In my last life, Thomas had chosen me. By the time he turned around, Clara had already been pulled ashore by the village layabout. He held that against me, a deep and unspoken resentment that poisoned our entire marriage. I could still vividly recall the image of my father's slumped shoulders as he was falsely accused and taken away. This time around, Thomas got what he apparently wanted. He saved Clara, and I decided I would much rather have a husband who was purely simple than one who was a brilliant and destructive enemy. "It's all right, Sarah," I told her, trying to soothe her. "Leo might not be the sharpest, but he is incredibly handsome. I'm not exactly losing out. Please stop crying." A small smile finally broke through her tears, though she still looked at me with a mix of helplessness and concern. Just then, we heard voices approaching from outside. It was Thomas and Clara. Sarah's face hardened, and she looked ready to get up and tell them to leave. I smiled and gently pulled her back down to her seat. I had nothing to feel ashamed of. If they were bold enough to come here, I was bold enough to face them. The curtain over the doorway was pushed aside, and Clara immediately rushed to my side, taking my hand in hers. "Amelia," she began, her voice full of feigned concern, "the whole village is saying you're going to marry that simple man who saved you. This is all my fault. If I had just been more careful, Thomas wouldn't have needed to save me, and none of this would have happened." I slowly lifted my head, my eyes locking with Thomas's across the room. It felt like we were meeting again after a lifetime had passed between us. Thomas placed a hand on Clara's shoulder, his expression soft with pity. Clara, you're just too good-hearted. You are the most important person in the world to me. What happens to anyone else doesn't concern me. If only he had been that direct in our past life, I would have preferred to drown rather than let him save me. I remembered how, in that other life, when Thomas had pulled me from the river, his eyes were as cold and unforgiving as a winter night. Amelia, he had said, his voice flat, you have a lot of courage. Would you really pull Clara down with you just to force me into this marriage? I had coughed up river water, trying to form the words to defend myself, but then I saw Clara shivering, wrapped in Thomas's coat. Thomas, she had said softly, maybe Amelia didn't mean to. That single sentence extinguished the last bit of warmth in his gaze. The day after we were married, he packed his belongings and moved into the single men's dormitory. And after Clara's death, he began the systematic and deliberate destruction of my family. Remembering this, a cold laugh escaped my lips. This is a private matter. I don't need either of you to worry about it. Clara's eyes filled with tears that began to fall. She tightened her grip on my wrist. Amelia, are you blaming me for this? I know you and Thomas were engaged, but so many people saw him save me from the river. Love isn't about who was first. The one who isn't loved is the one who is in the way. How about this? We can compete for him fairly. Let's not get married just yet. The three of us can see where things go. We can let Thomas decide once he understands his own heart. I almost laughed out loud at the absurdity of it. We lived in a modern society where a man married one woman, and here she was, suggesting a ridiculous arrangement that belonged in a bygone era. I watched them with the detached coolness, one playing the innocent victim and the other her stoic protector. It finally dawned on me. They hadn't come here to offer an apology. They had come to gloat, to humiliate me, to look down on the woman he had cast aside. Before I could respond, Thomas gave me a look of pure contempt, as if I were something unclean. Clara, why are you even telling her these things? I will only ever love you. The thought of looking at any other woman is disgusting to me. A brief flash of victory crossed Clara's face before she masked it with a look of pity. Thomas, don't say that. Amelia is already going through enough. I scoffed, my fingers lightly tracing the pattern on my wedding dress. Thomas is right. A marriage should be based on loyalty. I'm getting married to Leo soon. I have no interest in any complicated relationships with other men. Clara's eyes widened in genuine surprise. Amelia, you're actually willing to marry a simpleton? I looked her straight in the eye. What's wrong with a simpleton? At least a simple man won't intentionally hurt people. He won't spend his time plotting against them. Thomas's face immediately lost its color. He grabbed Clara's wrist and turned to leave without another word. Clara stumbled after him, but not before she turned back to give me a small, triumphant smile. Sarah stamped her foot in frustration. Those two, they came here just to make you feel bad. She grabbed a broom and began sweeping furiously at the spot where Thomas had stood, as if trying to clear away the negative energy he'd left behind. I was scheduled to take part in the collective group wedding, the same ceremony as Thomas and Clara. It had become a matter of personal pride. I took my life savings and bought fine red fabric to sew my own wedding gown. The stitches were small and tight, each one feeling as if I were sewing 2 lifetimes of hurt into the cloth. Suddenly, the clear ringing of a bicycle bell sounded from the entrance of the village. It was Mrs. Peterson, the most well-known matchmaker in the entire county. Amelia, I have wonderful news. Her voice was so loud that it brought half the village out of their homes to see what the commotion was about. Walking behind her were 4 young men dressed in new blue work clothes. They carried large camphor wood chests, decorated with bright red characters on their shoulders. The man at the front held something covered with a red silk cloth, carrying it as if it were a priceless artifact. Make room, everyone, make room, Mrs. Peterson called out. This is something special. When she pulled the silk cloth away, a collective gasp went through the crowd. Good heavens, one of the village women exclaimed, slapping her thigh in excitement. a Shanghai brand sewing machine. The whole set is here, Mrs. Peterson announced proudly, counting on her fingers. A Forever brand bicycle, a Shanghai brand watch, a Peony brand radio. She drew out the words for dramatic effect. And it's all the newest, most popular merchandise from the co-op store in the county seat. More and more villagers gathered around, their voices a low hum of chatter. Well, I thought she was marrying a simpleton. This is a grander affair than the county official's wedding. Tisk, tisk. Is this all for show? Is she using her family's dowry to pay for the bride price? These people from the city are certainly different. A few of the unmarried men in the crowd were practically rubbing their hands together with envy. If I had known, I would have jumped in the river to save her myself. This isn't just getting a wife, it's like finding a treasure chest. Staring at the array of betrothal gifts, I was as bewildered as everyone else. Before I could ask a question, Clara appeared, holding Thomas's arm, and pushed her way to the front of the crowd. Clara looked at the impressive display of gifts, and a brief flicker of jealousy crossed her face. Amelia, she said, raising her voice so that everyone could hear. A daughter should think of her parents. Even if you're marrying a simpleton, you don't need to spend all of the family's savings, do you? She looked meaningfully at the gifts. That will be a lot of debt to repay. The villagers immediately began to whisper among themselves, and the way they looked at me started to change. So she's a big spender. These city kids really know how to throw money away. Exactly. I think she's the simple one. Why else would she spend her family's entire savings to marry him? A few of the single men began to heckle. Hey, if I knew it was this simple, I would have pretended to be a simpleton too. Maybe I could have found a city girl to marry me. Yeah, that river water must have really affected her thinking. The people around me laughed loudly. Thomas stood at the front of the crowd with his arms crossed, a mocking expression on his face. Amelia, you need to understand something. Clara is the only woman I will ever marry. As for you, he looked me over with open contempt, as if I were a cheap item for sale. Even if you begged me, I wouldn't give you a formal title. At most, if you promise to never marry anyone else, I will grant you special permission to be buried in our family's ancestral hall when you die. Clara immediately pretended to be concerned, gently pulling on Thomas's sleeve. Thomas, don't talk to Amelia like that. She's suffering enough, being rescued by a simpleton and now having to spend her family's fortune. Thomas sneered. Amelia, do you really think marrying a simpleton will bring you happiness? He's so slow, he probably doesn't even know what to do on a wedding night. Marrying him is just a life of abstinence. You'd be better off not getting married at all. I looked him directly in the eyes. Thomas, whether I get married or not and who I choose to marry is none of your business. Leo saved my life. Even if he's simple, I am willing to be with him. Thomas let out a dismissive scoff. Amelia, are you that desperate for a man? Treating a simpleton like he's some kind of prize. Clara put on a worried look. Amelia, life with a simpleton will not be easy. If you ever have any problems, don't be afraid to ask us for help. We're all from the city, after all. We will help you if we can. Hearing this, the villagers nodded their heads in agreement. That Clara is a good person. No wonder she found a great man like Thomas. It's because she's kind. Exactly. Not like some people who act so superior but end up having to marry a simpleton. What's wrong with a simpleton? I retorted. At least a simpleton has a good heart. He doesn't scheme and plot and destroy people's families. I gave a cold look to the gossiping villagers, deciding it wasn't worth arguing with them anymore. I turned to the matchmaker. Mrs. Peterson, let's move the gifts inside. Mrs. Peterson gave me a knowing wink and told the young men to carry the bicycle, sewing machine, watch, and radio into the courtyard. I pulled her aside and whispered, what is all this about? Where did Leo get this kind of money? A secret is a secret for a reason, Mrs. Peterson grinned, lowering her voice. You'll find out tomorrow. The night before the group wedding, I was checking my dress one last time by the light of the lamp when I heard a soft sound at the window. I looked up and saw Thomas's silhouette against the paper pane. Amelia, he whispered, his voice holding its usual arrogance. Are you really going to marry that simpleton? I sneered. Why shouldn't I? Isn't this what you wanted? Thomas was silent outside the window. The moonlight cast his shadow long and thin on the ground. Finally, he spoke, his voice sounding rough. It's not what you think. It's just, if I hadn't saved Clara that day, her life would have been ruined. My heart felt heavy. The needle in my hand stopped moving. So that was the reason. It explained why his eyes were always filled with such resentment when he looked at me. It explained why he swam directly to Clara in that freezing river without giving me a second thought. But now that he had what he wanted in this life, I didn't understand why he was here. The silhouette outside moved closer, and his voice suddenly became soft. Amelia, listen to me. Marrying that simpleton will only bring you pain. Just wait for me. Once I have things sorted out with Clara, I won't forget about you. The needle dropped from my hand, making a small clattering sound on the floor. I stared in disbelief at the blurry figure on the window. Just a few days ago, in front of the entire village, he had declared that Clara was the only woman he would ever marry, that the thought of another woman disgusted him. What was this performance now? I clutched my wedding dress so tightly that the fabric wrinkled in my hand. The painful memories of my past life came rushing back. My father's stooped shoulders as he was publicly denounced, my mother crying until she could no longer see, and the child I had lost. Thank you for your concern, I said coldly, but how my life turns out has nothing to do with you. I threw the window open, looking at Thomas's surprised face. He stammered, trying to persuade me. We have a history together. There will always be a place for you in my heart. Amelia, don't be so stubborn. Is being with me really worse than marrying that simpleton? You're right, it is, I said. I would rather marry a simpleton than ever have anything to do with you again. The color drained from Thomas's face, and his expression twisted into an ugly snarl. Amelia, don't be ungrateful. You want to marry that simpleton? Fine, just don't regret it. The sound of Thomas's footsteps had long since disappeared into the night, but my mind felt clearer than it had in a long time. The scissors cut through the final thread. The tangled fate of 2 lifetimes, like that piece of red thread on the floor, could not be reconnected, and I no longer wanted it to be. As the sun began to rise, the mirror showed my tired face. The wedding dress was a vivid red in the morning light, but I found myself hesitating to put it on. Even though the future was unknown, this was the only way I could be sure to cut the last possible tie to Thomas. Amelia! Amelia! Sarah burst through the door, out of breath. Quick, you have to see the new notice the commune put up. You will never believe who Leo really is. I set down my comb and looked at Sarah's face, which was flushed with excitement. It was the first time she had smiled so genuinely since I had told her I was going to marry Leo. Who is he? I asked, taking the still damp, ink-scented notice from her hands. The morning sun streamed through the window, lighting up the printed words. Report on the heroic deeds of war, Hero Leo. Below the text was an old, faded photograph. A young officer in a sharp uniform stood on a stage, his features showing a slight resemblance to Leo's simple, honest face. My fingers trembled, and the paper slipped from my grasp, fluttering to the floor. That flood back in '75, Sarah said, her voice shaking as she picked up the notice. He saved 3 children from the co-op store, but a falling beam hit him in the head. When he woke up, he was... A sudden commotion erupted outside. I pushed open the window and saw Leo surrounded by the villagers. His faded uniform was adorned with medals that gleamed in the morning sun. Amelia. His voice was no longer slow and hesitant, but shy and gentle. When I saved you from the river that day, I suddenly remembered many things. It was like I woke up from a very long dream. Sarah whispered excitedly in my ear. The doctor said the shock of saving you helped him get his memory back. Looking at the man before me, no, I should call him Leo now, I was filled with a mixture of shock and overwhelming joy. Leo held out his hand to me, and without a second thought, I took it. His palm was broad and warm, and for the first time in a very long while, I felt completely safe. The crowd of villagers at the gate erupted. The faces that had been waiting to witness a joke were now frozen in astonishment. My goodness, the simpleton. No, Leo, he's a war hero. What kind of luck does Amelia have? One moment she's cast aside by Thomas, and the next, she's with a war hero. That explains it. I knew there was something strange about that bicycle and sewing machine. A simpleton could never afford those things. It turns out he was a hero all along. I heard Leo won 3 first-class merits. His salary must be hundreds of dollars a month. Amelia has really won the lottery. This is 100 times better than being with Thomas. The old village chief tapped his pipe against a post and raised his voice. Weren't some of you laughing at Amelia for marrying a simpleton? Now look who the real simpletons are. I sat on the back of Leo's bicycle, my hands lightly holding onto his waist. His back was straight and strong, and his faded uniform fluttered in the breeze, carrying the faint, clean scent of soap. This time, fate had been unexpectedly kind to me, offering me this precious gift. A man who would dive into a dangerous river for me. A hero who had risked his life to protect others. A partner who gave me a sense of peace. As our small group reached the stone bridge at the edge of the village, we came face to face with Thomas and Clara, who were walking together. He looked up and saw Leo on the brand new Forever brand bicycle, and for a moment, he didn't seem to recognize him at all. Who is this? Thomas squinted, his eyes examining Leo's crisp uniform and the shining medals on his chest. Is someone else getting married today? Mrs. Peterson, the matchmaker, laughed heartily. You're a busy man, Thomas. You must have forgotten. Today is Amelia's wedding day, too. The color drained from Thomas's face. What did you say? You're lying. There's no way Amelia's marrying someone else. Thomas trembled as he stumbled forward. When he saw me in my wedding dress, sitting on the back of the bicycle, his eyes filled with tears. I gave him a cold look and turned my head away. In this life, he had gotten what he wanted and was marrying Clara. He would never have the opportunity to hurt me or my family again. Suddenly, Thomas threw his arms out, blocking the bicycle's path. Amelia! His voice was a ragged, broken sound. Are you really going to marry this Leo? I frowned, confused by his question. Thomas, is there a problem? Thomas's lips trembled uncontrollably. Amelia, don't marry him. He reached out to take my arm, but Leo moved to block him. Thomas, Leo's voice was firm and calm. Please step aside. Don't hold up the ceremony. Thomas clenched his jaw as if he had made a difficult decision. Leo, Amelia, and I have had a misunderstanding. She can't marry you. The people watching were too stunned to speak. They couldn't believe Thomas would dare to disrupt the marriage of a soldier in public. Leo simply smiled with confidence and turned to look at me. Amelia, do you want to go with him? Thomas looked at me, his face a picture of desperation. I met his tear-filled eyes and shook my head firmly. No, I don't. Thomas swayed on his feet, looking as if he might fall over. He stared at me in disbelief. Leo chuckled softly. Did you hear that? She doesn't want to go with you. Crashing a wedding is one thing, but for a groom to crash his own wedding to try and steal another man's bride was something else entirely. Leo pedaled the bicycle forward, carrying me away from the scene. Thomas lunged forward as if in a daze, but a few of the stronger villagers held him back. Amelia, he roared, his voice raw with pain. Have you forgotten all the years we had together? Why are you marrying someone else? I didn't look back. I just held onto Leo's waist even tighter. His warmth spread through his uniform, making me feel incredibly secure. At this point, what history was there left to talk about? He hadn't remembered our past when he was destroying my family in our last life. Why was he acting like a devoted lover now? He didn't want to stop me from marrying Leo because he couldn't stand to lose me. He just couldn't bear the idea that something he once considered his was now someone else's treasure. That evening, after we had received our marriage certificate, Leo and I sat under the old locust tree at the edge of the village. Leo, I said, tracing the words voluntary union on the certificate with my finger, wondering if I should try to explain my history with Thomas. But he just gently took my hand. You don't have to say anything. It wasn't your fault. I understand. I looked up at his strong profile. Then why were you willing to marry a stranger? Leo looked out at the wheat fields in the distance, his eyes gentle. That day at the river, I saw you try to save that drowning child, and you almost got swept away yourself. Later, when you were sick with a fever, you kept mumbling, "Dad, run." I thought to myself, this girl must be carrying a lot of pain. A locust leaf drifted down and landed on our clasped hands. He continued, "And then, I watched you teaching the village children to read and carrying water for the elderly widows. I thought, even if I remained a simpleton for my whole life, it would be a blessing to spend it with someone like you." Leo, my voice trembled. The truth is, the words wouldn't come out. How could I tell him that I had only approached him as a way to escape the tragedy of my past life? He seemed to sense my turmoil, and his warm hand tightened around my trembling fingers. "Amelia, look." He pointed to the swallows returning to their nests in the distance. "A bird doesn't ask why it chose this branch for its nest. A flower doesn't ask why the sun shines on it. Some connections don't need a reason." A tear fell onto our joined hands. I took a deep breath, deciding to tell him the complete truth. At first, I have to admit, I was just using you. To my surprise, he laughed softly. "I know, but I believe that sincerity will eventually be met with sincerity." As the twilight deepened, the first star appeared in the sky. I reached out and smoothed a wrinkle on his uniform. "From now on," I said, speaking each word carefully, "my heart has room for only one person. You." The next day at work, the village gossip was more active than ever. "Oh, you should have seen it," Mrs. Peterson exclaimed while sifting grain. "Thomas was completely drunk outside the bachelor's quarters last night. There were broken bottles everywhere." Another woman lowered her voice conspiratorially. "I heard Clara was so angry, she smashed their new enamel basin. Thomas didn't even try to stop her. They fought for half the night." Over at the threshing ground, Thomas was hunched over recording work points, with dark circles under his eyes. Clara brought him his lunch, her own eyes red and swollen. The moment they looked at each other, the tension was obvious. "The people who were there for the wedding night celebration got quite a show," the scorekeeper said, a cigarette hanging from his lips. "The bride was crying and screaming that she was going back to her mother's, and the groom was just squatting by the door, chain-smoking. That wasn't a marriage, it was a battle." I was bundling rice stalks when a shadow fell over me. Leo had come up behind me, holding out a small woven straw fan. "Take a break." The metals on his uniform shone in the sun, so brightly that Thomas, who was not far away, had to turn his head. The old village chief walked over, tapping his pipe. "See, this is what a real marriage should look like. Some people just don't appreciate what they have." Clara's faint crying could be heard from the direction of their new home, but Leo and I just smiled at each other and continued with our work. In the golden fields of rice, our shadows leaned closely together. One morning, while I was hanging laundry in the yard, Clara burst in, her hair a mess. She pointed a finger at me, her eyes red. "It's all your fault, you temptress. Now Thomas won't even look at me." Before I could say a word, Leo stepped in front of me. He was so tall that Clara's angry demeanor immediately faded. "Clara," his voice was stern but not harsh, "you need to be careful with your words. Interfering with a soldier's marriage is a serious offense." Clara was left speechless. Just as she was about to have a tantrum, Thomas hurried over. His face was pale, with dark circles under his eyes. "Come back with me," he said, grabbing Clara's arm, only to be met with a sharp slap across the face. "Whose name were you calling last night? Amelia. Even in your dreams, you're calling for Amelia." Clara clung to the wooden gate, refusing to move. "I'm not going. I want this homewrecker to explain herself today." Thomas tried to pry her fingers off the gate, sweat beading on his forehead. "Stop making a scene." "A scene?" Clara laughed hysterically, pulling a pair of scissors from her pocket. "This is a scene!" she shrieked, looking as if she were about to cut her own wrist. The crowd of villagers pointed and whispered. "Tisk tisk, trying to harm herself just 3 days after the wedding. I heard they haven't even consummated the marriage." What did Thomas do to deserve this? Thomas's face was livid. He suddenly lifted the struggling Clara over his shoulder like a sack of grain and started walking away. One of Clara's shoes fell off, but she was still screaming curses. "Put me down, you heartless man, Thomas! If it weren't for you!" As they struggled past the threshing ground, Clara grabbed onto a rack of drying corn, pulling herself and the entire rack down into a mud puddle. Thomas tried to pull her up but was dragged down with her. The sound of his new pants ripping all the way up his thigh was audible across the yard. "Serves them right," Mrs. Peterson spat on the ground. "A pair of dogs. That's instant karma." I stood at my gate watching the miserable couple retreat amidst the laughter of the crowd. Leo gently took my hand. "Don't look. It will only upset you." His palm was warm and dry, bringing a strange sense of calm. The sound of shouting from Thomas's house faded into the distance, as if it were happening in another world. The days went by, but Thomas's attempts to interfere in my life only became more frequent. During the autumn harvest, while Leo was away at a meeting in the county town, he cornered me at the threshing ground. He was unshaven, but he held a bouquet of wild roses, which had been my favorite flower in my past life. "Amelia," he said, his voice trembling, "I know you came back too. Fate gave us a second chance so we could fix the regrets of our past." I laughed coldly, tearing the roses apart one by one and grinding them into the dirt with my heel. "Thomas, you are truly pathetic right now." His eyes immediately turned red. "I know you hate me, but this time You what?" I interrupted him. "You haven't had the chance to destroy my family yet? Or you haven't married Clara yet? You already got what you wanted, so why are you still bothering me? Or are you just one of those people who is never happy with what they have?" Thomas looked as if he had been physically struck, staggering back a step. Just then, the sound of Leo's bicycle bell could be heard in the distance. Thomas suddenly grabbed my wrist. "Come with me. Let's leave right now. I can give up everything." "Let go." I pulled my arm away. "Your everything? Look over there." I pointed to Clara, who was frantically searching for him nearby. "That's all you have left." Leo strode over, the metals on his chest glinting in the sun. Thomas flinched like a mouse seeing a cat and instantly let go of me. "Thomas," Leo's voice was stern, "if you bother my wife again, I will report your behavior to the authorities." Thomas's face was pale, but his eyes were still fixed on me. "Amelia, look me in the eye and tell me you feel absolutely nothing for—" "Nothing," I said, cutting him off. I turned and took Leo's arm. My husband, my hero, has only ever been Leo. Unable to get what he wanted from me, Thomas started drinking heavily all day, neglecting his accounting duties. And Clara, watching Thomas's decline, felt the poison of jealousy burn hotter inside her. One late autumn evening, I was returning from our small vegetable plot with a basket when I saw Clara lurking suspiciously by our courtyard wall, whispering to Rick, her husband from my previous life. Rick had a cigarette hanging from his lips and was grinning in a sleazy way, occasionally glancing into my yard. I quieted my steps and slipped behind a haystack, where I could faintly hear Clara's voice, filled with hatred. "Tomorrow night, they're showing a movie in the village. Everyone will be at the threshing ground. You find a way to drag her into the woodshed behind the hill. When it's done, I'll give you $20. Rick chuckled. "Clara, you really hate her that much?" Clara's voice was chillingly cold. If it wasn't for her, would Thomas have become like this? If I can't have what I want, neither can she. I clenched my basket, my nails digging into my palms. Clara. She couldn't keep her own husband's affection, so she decided to place all the blame on me. The next morning, I happened to run into Clara while washing clothes by the river. She was downstream, slamming a washing paddle into the water as if she were imagining it was my head. "Clara," I said with feigned concern, "you look terrible. Didn't you sleep well?" She shot up, her eyes like poisoned daggers. "None of your business." I slowly wrung out my clothes. "I heard Thomas has been going to the county town a lot recently. You don't think—" "Shut up." She stood up with a splash, soaking her shoes. "Amelia, don't be so smug. You think you're so great just because you married a war hero?" I just smiled, picked up my basket, and walked away, hearing her spit viciously on the ground behind me. "Just you wait," she muttered. That evening, the village loudspeaker began announcing the movie. I stood at the window watching Clara, all dressed up, head toward the threshing ground. She didn't forget to give a meaningful look to Rick on her way out. Is everything ready? I asked Leo, who was sharpening a sickle. He looked up, his gaze calm. The local militia is already in position behind the hill. I've also informed the commune police. Are you sure you want to be the bait? He asked. I smiled. If I don't see Clara get what she deserves with my own eyes, how can I ever have peace of mind? Halfway through the movie, I pretended I needed to use the outhouse and walked off by myself. Sure enough, just as I rounded the granary, Rick and another local troublemaker jumped out from the shadows, grabbing me by both arms. Shh. Rick's breath smelled of alcohol. Amelia, we're going to take you somewhere fun. I pretended to struggle in a panic. Let me go. What are you doing? Don't be scared, he said, his greasy hand touching my face. In a minute, you'll... Ah! Before he could finish, a bright flashlight beam shot out. Leo and 3 militiamen rushed out, their rifle barrels gleaming in the moonlight. Get the scoundrels, Leo yelled. Rick was so scared he wet his pants on the spot. The other man tried to run, but was quickly taken down with a leg sweep. The news that Rick had been caught spread through the village like wildfire. The next morning before dawn, Rick's parents, along with a group of relatives, showed up at Clara's door. Clara, you wicked woman! Rick's mother wailed, sitting on the ground and slapping her thighs. If my Rick goes to prison, I'll make you pay. The moment Clara opened the door, Rick's father threw a bucket of manure right at her. Amidst the stench, Rick's sister lunged forward and grabbed her hair. You slut! You can't control your own husband, so you go after my brother! More and more people gathered to watch. Clara, covered in filth, tried to wipe her face as her hair was pulled and her blouse was torn. She looked around frantically and suddenly saw Thomas walking down the alley. Thomas! Thomas! Save me! She screamed as if he were her last hope. But Thomas didn't even slow down. He walked straight toward my house. He was carrying a net bag with 2 cans of fruit and a packet of brown sugar, rare items from the co-op store. Amelia! He knocked on my gate, his voice deliberately gentle. I heard you had a scare last night. I brought you something. Get out, Leo said, stepping out of the house. Thomas backed away sheepishly, but he hadn't given up. I just came to see if Amelia was hurt. Just then, Clara's heart-wrenching screams came from the distance. I turned to see her being held down by Rick's family, her face covered in scratches, her clothes torn to shreds. But her eyes were locked on us, especially on the things in Thomas's hands. Her gaze was as venomous as a poisoned blade. Thomas, are you even human? She suddenly found a burst of strength, broke free, and rushed toward him. I did all that for you, and this is how you— Slap! A loud slap cut off her screams. Thomas's face was livid. You crazy woman! If you ever dare to touch a hair on Amelia's head again, I'll kill you. Clara held her cheek, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her lips trembled, and she let out an inhuman shriek before lunging at Thomas, and they began to fight. I hurt people for you. I disgraced myself for you, and this is how you treat me. Her nails clawed bloody lines down Thomas's face. The villagers pointed and commented, some even cracking melon seeds. Mrs. Peterson's voice rose above the noise. When dogs fight dogs, they both get bitten. The spectacle finally ended when the militia arrived and took Clara away. As she was being escorted to the commune for investigation, her hair was disheveled, her eyes were vacant, and she kept muttering, It was Amelia, it was all her fault. And Thomas, under the contemptuous stares of the crowd, slunk away in disgrace. But I knew his personality. This wasn't over. Sure enough, that night, I got up and saw a dark figure outside our wall. It was Thomas, squatting there, surrounded by empty liquor bottles. Amelia, he slurred drunkenly. I know you can hear me. I was wrong. I was really wrong. I gently drew the curtain. Behind me, Leo's warm arms wrapped around my shoulders. Want me to chase him off? No. I leaned into his embrace, listening to Thomas's drunken sobs outside. Let him cry. Compared to what I went through, this little bit of suffering doesn't even cover the interest. Leo's arms tightened around me. The faint, clean scent of soap from his clothes made me feel completely safe. The sound of the night watchman's clapper echoed in the distance. Once, twice, like a final sound for the past. Later, I heard that Clara was sent to a labor camp for inciting a crime. During a heavy rainstorm, she tried to escape, fell into a ravine, and was left paralyzed for life. Thomas, due to his constant drinking, made a mess of the village accounts and was sent to do hard labor at a remote forestry station. As for Leo and me, "Honey, look!" He came back from the county town, beaming, holding up a paper with a red stamp. "The leadership has assigned us a house in town." Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating the transfer order. He had been appointed deputy head of the county militia, and I was given a job as a technician at the new textile mill. On the day we moved, the entire village came to see us off, offering endless congratulations. The most common thing people said was, "I always knew you two were a perfect match. 1,000 times better than that other pair." Our new home had a small yard where Leo planted a pear tree. He said it would blossom next spring and he would build me a swing under it. Every weekend, we would ride our bicycle to the river. He would fish and I would read. Sometimes we'd run into people from town and they would respectfully greet us as Deputy Head Leo and Technician Amelia. And late at night, I would lie in his arms, listening to his steady heartbeat, and I would always think of that morning I fell in the river. Fate had given me a second chance, not to be consumed by revenge, but to meet the man who was willing to jump into an icy river for me. Outside the window, the pear tree's new branches swayed gently in the moonlight, and all the suffering of my past life had finally faded away, becoming nothing more than a distant dream.